make a ready deck. All unnecessary personnel clear the flight deck and catwalk areas. Those personnel remaining get in a complete flight deck uniform. Get your helmets on, buckled, sleeves rolled down, and goggles down.
Get those goggles, will you?
Okay, get them moving. Get them moving.
Check the chocks, tie downs, fire bottles, tow bars, and other loose gear back to deck.
Hello, and welcome to F-14 Tomcat Radio Show. Tomcats on the ball.
How about Tomcat ball 6-0?
Roger ball.
Hello and welcome to the official F-14 Tomcat radio show, straight out of Grumman, Calverton, where all 712 airframes are built. I'm the show's producer. My name's Lorenzo. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. We have an awesome show lined up here. Straight from the DVD feature, Tomcat Tales. It's Commander David Rickter, call sign Sledge. Good evening, sir.
Hey, how you doing tonight?
Also joining us from the E-2 Hawkeye is John O'Niell, call sign Chimpo. Good evening, sir.
Gentlemen, good evening. How are you?
Representing Wayne Ansteys, a Grumman employee in the Grumman families of Long Island. And that's his son, Stephen Anstey. Good evening, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Sitting in the front seat, inverted, with one hand on the stick, using the other hand to keep up foreign relations. It's your executive officer from the Diamondbacks of Fighter Squadron 102. And that's Jerry Leekey, call sign LEEKSTER.
Hey, happy to be here.
Sitting in the back seat, arguably the most powerful man in the world in 2005. And that's your radar intercept officer, Lieutenant Commander Eric McMullen, call sign SYPHIN, from the Tomcatterrs of Fighter Squadron 31.
Hello, everybody. Happy to be here.
Good evening, guys. It's an awesome show we got lined up, and looking forward to it. LEEKSTER SYPHIN, take it away.
All right. Well, we're going to start with some, I wouldn't exactly say old school Tomcat history, but certainly going back farther than me. We're going to talk about Sledge's career. So welcome, Sledge. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Sledge had a pretty illustrious career over a pretty compact amount of time, really. So can you just kind of walk us through the big overview of what you did? Obviously, you got winged. We know that. I mean,
Yeah.
it wouldn't happen if you didn't get winged. We'll skip that part unless there's anything.
Well, I went through the training command, during the Reagan era. So, I mean, it was 18 months from commissioning to getting winged. And to my utter surprise, I was told I was going to Miramar to fly Tomcats when I fully expected to be a surgrad. In fact, I've been told I was going to be a surgrad already. So,
And for those of us who are listening, surgrad, how would you describe a surgrad?
surgrad is probably one of the worst programs the Navy ever had. A newly winged aviator can make him an instructor. I know Leekster's heard my opinion on this, and it gets some guys' butt hurt. But, the only two times I almost got killed in the training command were with a surgrad in the front seat.
I would agree wholeheartedly. Unfortunately, I mean, no offense to the guys who got selected to do it, but nobody wanted to do that. It's a selectively retained graduate. So you go through 2 years of struggle to get your wings. You're all excited to go out and be a Navy pilot and fly off of carriers, and then they tell you you're going to stick around and be an instructor for 2 years. So. Yeah. There's no pilot that wants to do that, and but the guys who did it gave it their best effort, but they certainly didn't have the experience to be an instructor yet, because you're just taking the least experienced Navy pilot in the entire Navy, and now you're turning around and asking that pilot to teach other pilots. So they do the best they can, but I have to agree with Sledge. It wasn't fun for any of us.
Yeah, it already feels weird when they in the Tomcat rag, when they hand right after the rag, when they hand a Tomcat over to a couple new guys, a couple nuggets, and say go out to the boat. What? And so you're doing even less basically back in the training command. So thankfully you got the get out of jail free card.
I did. And So I went to Miramar, and at that time they were having airframe problems with the cracks in some bulkhead, and I can't remember what bulkhead it was. But so the rag was down to just maybe a dozen airplanes, and at one point it went down to 2 airplanes when I was going through ACM. So it was just a long, slow process to get out of the rag. So I got winged in May of '87. You know, we get a jet fixed, and then one of the fleet squadrons would need it to go do Fallon or go on deployment or whatever. So the rag was really kind of a slow process there, which didn't really help matters too much when you're trying to learn a new airplane, obviously.
But you showed up there right after Top Gun came out, so you're kind of in the heyday of Miramar. That was like the time to be there. You know, the O Club is booming every Wednesday, and everybody in the whole world that can get a hold of a military airplane is flying it to Miramar to be there for Wednesday night, right?
It was incredible. I used to tell them, "Where were you when I was 18 and I needed you?" I was married. My wife was down the street in base housing. There was no game for me.
Right. But you guys had but I mean, you had a lot of time off in the rack, so you must have enjoyed that time a lot, I imagine.
Well, yeah, I did have a lot of time, and I think at that stage, like you said, you want to get out to the fleet and do stuff. You don't really appreciate the time off until you don't have it anymore, and that's I would say that was the predominant feeling afterwards. Was like, man, I was having a good time just kind of kicking back, flying once a week or twice a week, and then hanging out and going to the club and doing that. But at the time, you looked at it like, damn it, I need to get out there. I want to get out there. I want to do something, So
totally, the hurry up and wait. No, I don't want to wait anymore. I want to go.
When you get older, you kind of appreciate the fact that you had that time off.
Mm-hmm.
So you guys you finish up the rag and then you get assigned which squadron, or did you know, or did they just surprise you, or did they give you a chance to pick, or how did that work back?
No, there was no pick, and I don't remember the details. I just remember the XO coming in and saying, "Oh, you're going to one of my old squadrons, and you're gonna go be an Aardvark and wear an orange bag." And so
that's something a lot of folks don't probably know about that squadron. That was kind of the signature move for the Varks, right? That you guys wore those orange flight suits, which is kind of what test pilots wear these days, but that was your squadron color. So was that on every flight, or just on the Friday, or how did you guys do that?
It was pretty much mandatory on Friday. I mean, if you didn't have your orange bag on Friday, you were going to get talked to by the head office. And the funny thing is some of those bags were, had extensions added onto the legs, and I mean, it was just like this hodgepodge of sewn together old, some of those things were probably 30 years old.
Oh, wow. So you didn't take them with you?
No.
They were squadron organizational clothing or whatever.
So when you checked out of the squadron, you left your orange bag there. I have one because when I left the squadron, they were just starting to disestablish.
Mm-hmm.
So everyone had to keep a bag.
I remember 213, our sister squadron. They were your sister squadron at one point, but they're also our sister squadron on the last deployment. And those guys were talking about the bag. They had to buy their dark blue bags that they had, and they were like $450 or something like that. I mean, no joke. But they get to take them with them. But then again, the squadron was not going to be flying Tomcats anymore anyway. So, oh well. Anyway, so yeah, you got to the Aardvarks. How was that as a squadron?
Well, like I mentioned earlier before we started recording, it was a little bit interesting as far as a leadership perspective. I think it was, they were okay guys, but they weren't the best XO team I've ever seen in my life. That way. And I hope they're not listening, but if they are, I don't
they're probably dead.
Bad about it, but they were just the remnants of what happened when the Vietnam War ended, and they got rid of a lot of people. But then they realized they had to have a certain number of guys that are going to fleet up into those positions, and these two guys were two of them.
Last man standing, so to speak.
What ship were you on at that time, and what was the air wing makeup? It's a classic air wing makeup.
Yeah, it is. It was a classic air wing. First cruise was around the Horn, Enterprise, to bring the Enterprise to the East Coast to have the reactors defueled and taken out, and it went from, I believe it was 12 reactors down to 4. So the Enterprise is a knockoff ship. There's no other ship like it, and it had 12 reactors in it at the beginning. And so we brought that around the world to Norfolk, and then our fly off was basically cross country.
Wow. So did you go around the tip of South America? Is that what you're saying then?
No, we did not. We went.
You went the long way. The long way.
Yeah, and then we went around Africa.
Wow. Did you stop in South Africa?
We also freed Nelson Mandela because he was released while we were going. Scared him into freeing Nelson Mandela.
Well, thank goodness for that. I'm sure they got a nice medal.
Yeah.
But that must have made for some interesting flying, right? I mean, some days you probably don't fly because the ship's trying to move and all that, and then when you do fly, the diverts are changing every time. It gets a little bit challenging.
Or there are no diverts. I mean, we did a lot of blue water ops back then.
Mm-hmm.
A lot.
And of course, you had your standard Soviet trawler behind you at that point, right?
Yeah. We did the first one off the Aleutians pretty. I can't tell you how they did it. You guys probably know. It involved a floating apparatus that they push off the back in the middle of the night. But we ditched that first one for about a month, and then they caught back up with us.
That whole blue water ops concept is something that the Navy kind of got away from as the years went on. And in the Cold War and in those days, certainly in the 80s, you would do flying in the middle of the ocean with no diverts, and those airplanes, with the accident rates and the way that losing an airplane got pretty expensive, the Navy kind of backed away from that over in the early 90s. And so you wouldn't even fly unless you had a divert. A lot of folks think that these carriers go out in the middle of the ocean and there's no diverts, but we almost always plan for a divert, especially these days. And I've seen at least, you hear stories, and I saw it once in person where the entire launch had to divert to land base because of weather. And that's not fun. Nobody knows if they're going to have enough gas to get there, and usually the weather is really bad. But I don't know if you can imagine a blue water disaster like that, where you're trying to get folks aboard, and it's either get aboard or eject, and then the weather's so bad that the helicopters might have to go around trying to pick people up out of the water. Yeah. So those kind of worst case scenarios get a little bit scary. And then I think we're doing the accident rates and the safety culture in the Navy is much better now than it was in those days. We took a lot of chances, I think.
Oh, yeah, by far. I mean, I can remember the beginning of that first cruise. We were up, like I said, up along the Aleutians. We had a quarter inch of ice all over the flight deck, and we're launching all day and all night long, and you'd have a plane captain on each side with a chain and on each main mount. He's looking at the yellow shirt, the director, and if the director put his hands down, that was the signal to throw the other hook in a pad eye because the airplane was sliding sideways.
Wow.
If you're standing on the brake, nothing happening.
You're basically dropping anchors, what you're saying, right on the flight deck.
Basically.
And you had a grand total of probably 200 hours in the airplane at that time, or maybe somewhere under 500, I'm sure.
220, 221, whatever it takes.
Yeah.
If they decide to close the deck, who makes that decision? Does it come from Paddle's area on the LSO platform, or is it obviously Airboss?
They can voice their concern, and Chimpo can talk more about that. But obviously Paddles is going to say something. And one night it was a guy in an A7. I was sitting there looking down at him. He was turning next to me, and this fog's rolling in. This is not during the ice covered scenario, but I mean I couldn't even see the island. You could see the sodium lights lighting off in the background, but you couldn't see the island. And this old salty guy, picks up his mask, and I could see him reach over and he goes, "Tower, see weather."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden this long pause, and then it's 99 barbed wire. The launch is scrubbed. It's just one guy to mention the fact that this is really stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so ultimately, I think the captain has the hammer on it.
Mm.
Wow. Yeah, the captain or the air wing commander. You're always thinking, no, we're not going to go, and then the next thing you're taxiing to the cat, and you just can't believe that they're going to actually launch you. And you know, that's when you hear the guys say, my jet's broken. What's wrong with it? Well, there's a survival knife sticking out of my gyro.
I don't know how that got there. Well, obviously the boss, you know, he's up in the tower. He sees the conditions, but he's not necessarily paying attention. He's got a whole bunch of checklists to go through before launch, and so it just takes one guy in the cockpit to kind of call the no nonsense call. Boss, what are we doing here?
Yeah.
So yeah.
So you do that tour, which I mean, that you said your sister squadron had lost a couple airplanes. Is that right?
On the second cruise, we did a Westpac, which ended up being going in Gulf and hanging out. That was right post Gulf War One.
Mm.
And which ship? I missed it.
Lincoln.
Lincoln. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So then you do that, and they had a couple of airframe losses, or
yeah. There's one that got into a wing sweep. He came into the break. Wing sweep didn't work. And he got into some PIO thing. I'm not really sure how the MIR read at the end, but the Rio, really experienced guy. I can't remember his last name now, but his call sign was Stork. Big, tall guy.
Mm.
Good Rio. And he'd seen enough. And decided that was the end of that flight. That one, went into the water.
Mm.
And did you witness that one?
From the platform, yeah. Yeah, I was waving. And then the other one I witnessed airborne. It was a 4v4 against what were now our Hornet squadrons. My first tour obviously had two A7 squadrons. Like you said, a legacy kind of an airline, you know, A6s, two A7 squadrons, two Tomcat squadrons, so on. But that was a midair, and you guys might have seen the picture of the Black Knight with half a wing gone.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that.
Yeah. My wingman took that photo of escorting him, and I think that airframe still sits in Singapore as we speak.
Really?
Yeah.
So you were actually part of that 4v4?
Yeah, and you know, the funny thing is, I got back, and my wingman, after he got back, he said, "Man, it was kind of surreal because we're watching this airplane. It was almost slow motion, just this Tomcat just slowly rotating, falling straight down, kind of in a pancake, black smoke coming out, two parachutes. So we see two chutes, and the very first thing I look at is my weapons status because we were carrying live weapons at the time, you know, pulling the trigger and all that, you know, in training mode, on
right.
the arm." And, you know, just counting, okay, I've got all my...
I didn't launch something, did I? Wait, hold on.
So it turns out what he had done, the Black Knights were out, they got out late. So I did a run with my wingman against the 4 Hornets, and while they went out to the cap station, and they decided to do an impromptu 1v1 at the cap station, waiting for us to come back. And the lead said left to left, and the wingman said left to right, and
that's very clear. Really, very clear.
Yeah.
So did they just lost one of the aircraft of those two though?
Well, one went totally into the water, and the other one's, like I said, still in Singapore.
Okay.
I'm sure it's a total scrap job there.
Mm-hmm.
But the picture of it with the wing gone, that it's still flying, is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
It's mind-blowing to see that photograph.
Especially for an airplane that doesn't fly by wire, you know. It's probably pretty much of a handful there.
Yeah. So that was...
That wing back, you know, that wing mishap where the wings didn't come out really kind of highlights a problem with the airplane that a lot of folks are not aware of, especially people that probably have seen the airplane on like DCS and different places where, you know, the wings they weren't that reliable in the A. I mean, you really, you hit the merge and you're smoking along, and, you know, as you're fighting the airplane, you're really making sure the wings are coming out because it doesn't fly right without the wings out. You're not going to be able to turn. and people would come into the overhead and come into the brake at very high speed with the wings back manually, and they would flip it into auto. And at 300 knots, you would check, that was something you checked to make sure that you had the wings actually coming out.
Yep.
Because if they don't come out, now you have to put the emergency handle up and get them out manually, which can totally mess up your whole landing checklist, and it becomes a real handful at that point. But,
yeah, you're certainly going to extend there.
Yeah,
I don't remember a single time. I mean, in the D, I only flew the D, but I don't remember a single time that we didn't ever have the wings move when we were expecting them to. But it was the same wing sweep programmer.
Yeah, I was going to say.
As far as I recall.
Same.
So I don't think it was any different about the D, but I don't remember it ever happening that we didn't have it respond as we expected it to. So maybe they did something in between there that improved. I don't know. I don't remember it ever being a problem.
No.
It was just like clockwork.
Well, I think you're lucky. It happened to me more than once, and I can tell you it happened to me in the overhead, and it's happened to me in a couple of engagements too. And it was very frustrating when you're turning the airplane and you're trying to pull G's, and then you look in your mirrors or you look out the side and the wings haven't come out the way they're supposed to, or they're not moving at all. And now you're fighting in the cockpit. You're with the emergency wing sweep handle trying to get the wings out while you're trying to maintain SA in a dogfight, because you don't want to knock it off. You want to keep fighting, you know.
Yeah.
At least that was my experience. I don't know what you had, Sledge, but would you agree with that?
Yeah, I've had them not work one time, and it was. I'm not even sure if it was an engagement or not. I know it wasn't in the overhead, but it was just. It might have been a profile. I was flying a Pro C or something. They just like, hey, this is not working right.
Mm-hmm. Well, so
go ahead, SYPHIN.
I was going to say, yeah. So you after that you went to an adversary squadron, which was kind of a neat deal, maybe.
Yeah, it was a neat deal, but I in hindsight, if I could, do it all over again, my first choice, I wanted to go to Key West. Just wanted to change,
Yeah.
My wife was from the East Coast. Her family's on the East Coast. Key West would have just made that a little bit more manageable from that standpoint. So I wanted to go to Key West, and my skipper at the time was trying to get me to go to the RAG to be a paddles, which ultimately that probably should have been what I did, what I should have done. Because while I enjoyed the adversary tour, it was cut short by a year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's strike one on the failure to screen for department head. I didn't have time to do the breakout fit reps. And I get this. I don't blame the skipper. He had to take care of the guys that had, coming through and stuff. So it is what it is. It's just not a big deal to me. But so the fact that got cut short.
Was that on your dream? Did you ask him for an adversary job, and you said, I want to go to Key West, my first choice, and then you ended up at Miramar, or how did that work?
Exactly how it worked, yeah.
So, I mean, that to me was the ultimate pilot job. I always thought being an adversary would be the coolest thing, especially in those days, because the adversary squadrons had a multitude of different airplanes to choose from, and you got to fly all of them, from what I understand. What airplanes did you fly as an adversary pilot?
Well, when you first checked in, you did the T2 spin program for the RAG students that came over and had to do a spin profile before they started the ACM phase. So that's what you did that, and then you did your A4 IUT syllabus. And then after you had been doing the A4 syllabus for about a year or so, then they would send you to F-16 school. So I got to fly basically the T2, several variants of the A4, including some of the mics that the Marines had at UMA when they got rid of them. We got those. As did Top Gun. We were in the same hangar as Top Gun at the time. It was before the Crystal Palace was built across the street. And then the F-16N.
So what were
Did you have the Super Fox?
Yeah, we had Super Fox, regular Foxes, Super Foxes, and then the mics, which had the same motor as the Super Fox, the 408, I think.
A lot of people don't realize that an A4 with that big motor like that, especially lightened up, was a pretty challenging dogfight for an F-14. That thing could really rate.
Yeah.
And you could use a vertical, right? The energy addition was eye-watering in that little airplane.
Pretty nice.
What was it like thrust to weight with that bigger engine?
Oh,
Dry, obviously, because there's no afterburner. But
man, I'm gonna have to dig. But I just remember someone saying at about half gas, it's getting really close to 1-to-1 thrust to weight ratio.
at dry, wow, that's pretty impressive. Yeah, light little airplane.
The advantage you had as a Tomcat was, it was the A4 was a delta wing, so it was a bleeder, right? So you would press them hard and try and get them to down to a slower airspeed, and then you could try and use the vertical, and he wouldn't be able to go as high as you. But tough fight, but it was cool, really cool airplane.
Yeah. Well, but part of that too is the as an adversary guy, you have to throw away all the things that the fangs out as a fighter guy. You got to take all that and put it aside and just fly the profile, whether it's a Cat 1 adversary, Cat 2 adversary, Cat 3 or Cat 4, and fly it appropriately. And if you're flying a Cat 1 and he's kicking your ass, which he should be, then you got to feel good about that. That's part of the difference of the adversary world, that you got to take the ego out a little bit. If you just got to do your job, and then if he's kicking your ass, which he should do, then you should be happy about that. Hey, this guy's doing what he's supposed to do.
Yeah, I remember plenty of times when you're doing like red air for somebody's Swifty syllabus, back for their qualification process, and you're like, same thing. I got to be a Cat 3 adversary, but okay, I really don't want to. So generally we kind of did, because we're flying too. So in the F-16, I've heard some pretty awesome stories about flying the F-16N. I think I heard something like, tell me, maybe this is a rumor, but I understand it had like a kind of a mode switch to it, where you could make it perform because it's digital, right? So you could make it fly like certain aircraft.
Oh, yeah. Pilot takeover PTO switch. Yeah, you're firing up some old neurons here. Yeah, that was it was really ill-advised to do that. I remember hearing about a Top Gun instructor that decided he was going to go ahead and reach down and hit that PTO switch while it was turning, and the thing swapped ends. So, taking the computer out of the F-16 is a really bad idea.
Yeah, gotcha. Was it a fun airplane to fly though?
Oh yeah, ergonomically, it was the best airplane I'd ever seen in my life. Everything, the thought and the way the form and function of it. An example to dispense flares was a big black button about the size of, maybe a cue ball, but I mean, not in diameter, not that deep, obviously. But in order to hit it with your wrist, you had to pull the throttle out of burner, and then you could rock your wrist and hit the flare. So I mean,
supreme ergonomics.
Built in the notion that you're wasting flares if you're still in.
That's pretty awesome.
Leaning back and the HUD and all that stuff, which was all kind of, the A model had a HUD that wasn't really that useful.
Yeah, I gotcha. And then so finishing that, going back to the Tomcat, did it feel weird, or how was that?
Well, it felt, going back to the A, it felt very underpowered. I did learn to fly with the HUD a lot more. So, I mean, I think that's when the light kind of really came on for me. I mean, I was comfortable at the boat during my second cruise, but my third and subsequent cruises after flying adversary, and I don't know why, maybe it's just more air experience or whatnot, but I think I was much better at the boat because of having flown the adversary mission. You're flaring even in the A4. We never flew the ball. We came in and flared. So I think your spatial orientation becomes a little bit better doing that.
So that's this third cruise you were talking about. That's you're talking about when you went back into your Super JO tour with the 111?
Right.
Yeah. And that was another short tour also, right?
Yeah, that was the second straw in the screen camel's back that snapped it. I had a CO who was because my old roommate on my first cruise was now the detailer, and he explained to me that back then, that was back when they just started putting a couple of super JOs, second tour JOs into every squadron, and the way the fit reps were supposed to work is the CO could break them out amongst all of the JOs yet still give a number one fit rep to his first tour JO and rank him amongst the first tour guys. My CO was the only CO in the entire naval aviation world that decided not to do it that way. So I think my fit rep was number 5 of 18 JOs. And I had 2 other super JOs in the squadron with me, and they were right down there in the pack with me. So
wow.
none of us screened for department head.
So thanks to your detailer friend.
Well, that's how I got the info. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. So go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just wondering how the tour. What? So you went from 111 to the adversary squadron at Miramar, and then you went back to 111. Is that correct?
Well, I was in 114 the first.
Oh, 114. I'm sorry. Then you went to 111.
Yeah.
And so when do you go to Japan?
Well, after the 111 tour, that squadron got disestablished as well. And so I went to basically to the wing, had a weapons school, Tomcat. They called it Tomcat Strike, which was it was like the baby of SWAT's pack or SWAT's land. It was basically a schoolhouse where, finally the Navy is going to standardize training, because and again, LEEKSTER can remember this, but each squadron had its own tactical SOP and admin SOP, and squadrons did different things and did business differently tactically. Whereas in the Air Force, a guy from the Air Guard in New Hampshire could join up with a guy in Nevada in the battle, and those guys talk the same language, same hand signals, everything's standardized. So that's what this Tomcat Strike was, the precursor to strike fighter weapons school, basically.
Mm-hmm.
It really was a huge deal for us, and we had a lot of lessons learned from the first Gulf War, from Desert Storm. We realized that the Navy had almost no standardization, and certainly we were not standardized between the services, because the Air Force and the Navy couldn't talk to each other. And as the F-14 moved into the multi-mission role of flying strikes, carrying air-to-ground weapons, we had an opportunity to take some lessons learned from our air-to-ground brethren, the A6 guys and the F-18 folks that came over and help us with that. And then they stood up these SWATs schools with very little money, to be honest with you. It was mostly very disappointing, because the guys that got those jobs, like Sledge and a couple other folks that I've known, they basically had to go around to squadrons and do training and fly the squadron airplanes that they were training on, and beg for rides and let me fly this mission, that kind of stuff. So yeah. They were shorted on flight time. So they were asked to do a very challenging thing within the community, but they weren't given a total tool set to accomplish that mission.
And they weren't very welcome at the very beginning either. I mean, who are you coming over to my squadron and telling me? Mm-hmm. That was kind of the prevailing attitude at the time.
So what did they give you extra training on, air to ground stuff and strike? Did you go up to the strike school or go up to Fallon or what did they do for you to give you that qual?
Yeah, some guys did that. And then, while I was at the weapons school there, that's when I went through Top Gun the second time to be myself, and then there were 2 Hornet guys. It was so bad they couldn't find a Rio to fly with me. I flew.
No way.
Yeah. So I was technically the first Swiftie on the West Coast, Tomcat Swiftie on the West Coast.
Wow.
There were 2 East Coast guys. I can't remember their names. One guy, great guy. He got out because his wife had quadruplets. He got a humanitarian in the Navy because his wife had triplets.
It's filling out the roster there. Wow.
Half a squadron at once.
Wow.
So I went through the Swiftie. So I had to go through Top Gun again and basically and that had a lot of air to ground stuff. LEEKSTER. That was pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. That had to be really great, and they took a lot of guys. They did a lot of cross pollination with the folks over at MOTS, which was the Marine Corps Air-to-Ground weapons school, which was highly regarded in those days. I mean,
Totally.
guys were fighting each other to try and get a MOTS slot to be able to say that they had done that strike training, because they were kind of the experts, and it was a tough school from what I understand.
Yeah.
But so you're a double Top Gun guy. Does that mean you get to wear a patch on both shoulders now?
Well, technically, I probably could. But.
You got the patch with a patch, right? One on top of the other.
Patches.
Patch.
Did it again on the bottom. Yeah.
So you leave there, and then they offer you orders to Japan, which I'm sure how did your wife feel about that?
Well, even before that, so while I'm at the weapons school, a guy, the OPSO at the D-RAG in Miramar, the D-Det, part of 101, basically, dropped his letter, and they needed a hinge to go be the OPSO at the D-Det for about a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And
what a huge good deal, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a great deal. And, the guy who was the wing commander at the time, you may have heard of him, Leekster. He's an East Coast guy, Gus Grissom. He was a retread, former Rio that became a pilot. And he was like, we got to get you well. And this is how we're going to do it. You're going to come work from, we're going to put you into the RAG as the OPSO, get a good fit rep out of that. And then another look.
Wow.
At the
Nice.
It's just a total turn of events, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and then at the end of that tour, that's when the detailer, or actually it was the placement officer that called me and said, "Hey, we've administratively screened you for department head. The bad news is you're going to Japan."
But let's back up 1 second here, because you were flying A's, and then you flew A's again. And then you go to SWATs, and you're struggling to get any flight time and all that. And then all of a sudden you're getting to go get trained up in the D. Did you do that, or you're flying B?
I got called in the D at the weapons school, so I've been flying it for a while.
Okay.
So now you've leapt into the future, right? I mean, you've gone from this antique Vietnam era airplane into a futuristic, insane machine, right?
Yeah, a real fourth generation fighter.
Yeah,
right.
Real fourth generation fighter for the first time. The A was 3.5.
You were developing tactics for it too, basically. So I mean, you're right in the middle of all the stuff going on when the D's trying to figure out what it's going to do, right?
Yeah, that whole thing was evolving with tape loads and things like that. I mean, for instance, when I first got to the D-RAG, we didn't have medium PRF.
Oh.
So if a guy if you had a PDESTT lock on a guy and the beam, guess what? It's just like an egg. It's going to drop.
Yeah.
So,
no MPRF on APG-71 is why I have the APG-71.
Right.
Yeah.
It was just the tape load. So we're working with all these other little ancillary issues. Half the jets had Ersts on them. Half of them didn't.
Oh.
Those are coveted items for the fleet, obviously.
Totally, yeah.
Which was a great piece of gear. I mean,
I didn't see the Erst until the fleet either. None of the jets in the RAG had them.
Right.
Yeah. I totally understand that.
I mean, that's a game changer in those days. That was a real huge deal. I mean, not just for the F-14, but globally. I mean, having an Erst was a huge tactical advantage.
The Tomcat was born with it on its first cruise, and with 27, and they took it away after not long, and it didn't resurface until the D again. It's the strangest thing.
Probably didn't work as good.
Well, yeah, that
generation.
That didn't have the processing power. You really needed a digital architecture that the D had to be able to process that signal appropriately. Yeah, it wouldn't have made a lot of sense. It was all analog, and so you're just looking at a TV screen of black and white. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah. When you could program it and tell it to do what you wanted to do and slave it like we had on the sensor slave panel, slave it to the other things, it was bam. It was your piece of gear. So you actually were using Erst some of the time.
Yeah. It was like, oh, I got one. Yeah.
Cool. Was that D02 you were operating on?
Yep.
I gotcha. Mm-hmm.
So you get to leave there, and then they say, okay, time to go to Japan, which is a pretty radical move. And we spoke about this earlier. I didn't go to Japan, but my impression is that culturally, it's significantly different from the rest of the Navy. I mean, it's like its own spaceport out there, if you will. I don't know what. Am I wrong, or what?
No, you're right. And in many regards, I think it's better because the whole air wing is co-located in one place. So you are talking to the Hornet guy. You are talking to the tank, the S3 guys at the time. Now, obviously, they're tanking off Hornets now, which I still can't.
That's a weird thing.
Yeah.
It's a weird thing.
What a waste of a. But anyhow, yeah, the co-location was one good thing. The fact that you're in such a crappy place, which Atsugi, it was a crappy place to be in my opinion.
Were you in base housing?
I was out on the economy for about a year, and then the last year and a half I was in base housing.
Yeah, because I know they had some issues with folks that lived in base housing. They're still having some cancer cluster or something along those lines.
Pags, Pags and his son, and Pags was my next door neighbor there, and his dog died about 3 months after they moved back, and my dog died about 4 months after they moved back. Weird epithelial cancer of some kind, but they're out in the backyard rooting around in the dirt and stuff,
Yeah, and this guy that Sledge is talking about, Pags Paganelli, very
I know Pags,
well-loved guy, and lost his son to cancer from there, and then later on he died from cancer. So
I did not know
probably
that.
all related to him living in base housing there in Atsugi.
It was the incinerator.
Yeah.
Right there on the.
Wow. Yeah, Pags is a good dude. I knew him as a captain, but yeah, wow.
So what ship was that the Indy at that time, or was it gone, or what ship was that?
When I checked in, it was the Indy, and we did 2 deployments on the Indy, and then right after the second deployment, it was time to go to Hawaii and swap out to the Kitty Hawk, which had relieved the Indy.
So you get rid of one old ship and you get another old ship.
I had cruised on the Indy on my Super JO tour. It was a good boat.
And what airplanes were those? Those were A models, or what?
Yeah.
Were
those were
A
A
models.
models.
From the rag D's and B's and A's and back to A's again.
I went from the D det in Miramar to the coveted D to A transition in Oceania. Although
coveted,
I will say, Fozzie Miller one weekend gave me a conjugal visit back to the West Coast in a D. He goes, "You're still qualified in it."
Wow! Oh, thank goodness.
I flew back out here after the West Coast for one weekend out of it all, but yeah, the A's we had, that was right when the Lantern was coming out and the NVGs and all that stuff. So we were kind of one of the first couple of squadrons that were getting all those modifications done.
Sensor forward deployed.
Yeah, exactly. So we had Lantern pods, NVGs, which was kind of a Rube Goldberg arrangement where you just turned off all the red lighting and they had these green floodlights along the console. And
the cockpits hadn't really been modified yet, is what you're saying, right? Yeah.
Not at all.
Well, you talked about like the experience of having like the whole air wing there at the same place, kind of like almost you're on. I mean, you're obviously not like you're in your staterooms on the ship all the time, but you're all there. I guess you're all in one hangar or one couple sets of hangars, right?
Right. Yeah. One AIMD for everything. I mean, it was, I'm sure it's an expensive way to do business, but in reality, it's probably a better way to do business.
Right. It's a cultural difference, not just from most Navy places, because, when you think about it, you've got F-14s at Oceania, the F-18s were down in Cecil and Jax, or you had your EA-6s out on the West Coast. You would never see those folks when you were off the ship. So, right. But even being on the ship, I felt like the Navy is different from the Air Force in that we're just, we work together. We're forced to work together on a carrier, and you eat dinner together. You're on the LSO platform together. You get to know all these people from the other airplanes, and there's a certain cohesiveness on an air wing that doesn't exist, in my opinion, in Air Force culture, where these different airplanes are all on different bases and they don't know each other.
Right.
So they're all like, "Oh, I fly A-10s. That's the best plane in the world," or "I fly F-15s. We're the greatest in the world," and they don't actually interact socially like we had to, or even professionally that much.
Air shows.
Yeah. Well, so why don't we bring Chimpo in here on this, because he was in Japan for a while too. Chimpo, why don't you introduce yourself just real briefly?
Yeah, Lieutenant Commander John CHIMPO O'niell. Spent my entire time flying the E2C and then the E2D Hawkeye. Over 1,000 hours in both now, and then started off in CAG-9 with VW-112, which has since been sundowned, which makes me feel old already, but that was an amazing squadron. CAG-9, 2 deployments with the Stennis. VW-120 as an instructor pilot for 2.5 years, and then got picked up a little early out of there as CAG-5 paddles out in Atsugi, Japan for the first 1.5 years, and then we did the transition down to Iwakuni for the last year I was out there. Flew with VW-125. I was the Tiger Tails on the USS Reagan. And then most recently VW-121 CAG-7, and then just did that 10-month deployment with the Lincoln, and back from that now finally, and things are finally starting to quiet down. But it's been a fun time so far.
Holy smokes! That's a whole different generation than Sledge and I. That's for sure.
Yeah, quick. The I was chopping the bit to get home, and you're on hump day.
Yeah, we were.
I don't think any of those boats were even commissioned when I was in the Navy.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of a lot. The the first the 2 back-to-backs that I started off with on the Stennis with CAG-9, those are both 8-monthers, and then got a bit of a break with the 2.5 years as an instructor pilot, but rolled out of there 6 months early for FDNF. So 6 months out of the year we're deployed on the Reagan, so that was for 2.5 years. And then took a COD off of the Reagan in November 2018, and January, 2 months later, I was on Com2X with the Lincoln. And then we went on what was supposed to be a 7-month kind of Great White Fleet tour around the world that had just gotten refueled, and it was going back to the West Coast. And we were 36 hours out of our Croatia port call, and we got the call that was like, "Hey, no, that's over. Head to the North Arabian Sea immediately." And we camped out there and ended up doing 11 out of 12 months at sea. And that calendar year for 628 hours. So I got home from that, and I was tired from that one. But it's been a good run. I love the job.
Wow.
So what's your trap count?
I'm tired just listening.
So I'm in the 300s now. But obviously my plane's dual piloted, so we only will log what we actually fly in the left seat.
Unless you're in the back, then they log all.
They log everything correct. Yeah, exactly.
NFOs count everything.
Yeah, exactly.
We count everything.
Log all the traps.
Yeah, it's got to be even more terrifying back there, and certainly the Hawkeye NFOs joke that every trap is a night trap for those guys because they get their little mole window, and there's not a lot.
No, thank you.
I don't know how they do it. It's dicey enough in the front of that plane. Never mind in the back. Just some of the
if they're sitting back there, they can wear the patch. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, we never gave them hell for that ever. I was just like, hey, look, we're all in this together. If this plane breaks apart, we're all going in. So
350 horrifying traps.
Oh yeah, exactly. So the number of actual traps that I've been in the plane for at this point probably closer to 600 to 700 range. But it's 6 deployments now under my belt, so they've accumulated. But again, I wouldn't trade it. I love the job, so it's been a good time.
What is the? I've wondered. You said you flew the E2C and then the
D.
The D afterwards, or Did you fly the old motors before the Scimitars, or did you fly both, or what was that?
So yeah, the motors have been the ones that I've flown have been the same the whole time. We got the 427s, where the COD's got the 425, and it just belches smoke out the back. You can always, especially from the platform, if you're sitting around waiting for the DV straight in, you can see them 30 miles out because the smoke plume's just coming out of the back of the plane. But yeah, we flew the 427s, the 2 Rolls-Royce T56, and those have been pretty much the same the entire time. The only upgrade that they really did was there's a system on the plane now that you can engage that essentially allows it to over horsepower itself if you get in any kind of trouble because the plane weighs more now with some of the systems that they put in the back.
He's got a horsepower gauge, just to throw.
So yeah, so that is my favorite part of the whole.
That's an ego gauge.
Yeah, it's I had a Mustang before a Corvette, and the first time I ever got into the sim of this plane, no kidding, one of the gauges is left and right horsepower for the engines, and I was just like, this is the most American gauge I've ever seen in my entire life. So yeah, and nobody, we always joke, I mean, nobody picks the Hawkeye picks you. But I got in and I saw that horsepower gauge, and I was like, I'll be okay. This is fantastic.
Yeah.
What are you actually using to set your power with? Are you using torque or horsepower, or what do you set the power with?
So honestly, usually what we'll set is fuel flow, because we're rarely looking for range. We're certainly never looking for speed unless coming into the break, in which case that's different. But I mean, cat shot and takeoff is always max power. And in the climb, we've got a bit of a climb schedule so that we don't overheat the engines. So then we're looking more at TMT, the temperatures. And then once we get on station, we'll drop the flaps down by a third, and then we're just setting fuel flow the whole time and then calculating how much gas we have to stay on station for when we have to come back to either the ship or a runway.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And
you guys can tank now, right?
Yeah, so it's that's the new thing. So it's VAW 126 just left with the Truman today, actually, or they're doing CQ and they're heading out, and they'll be the first to actually deploy with it. So before I left VAW 121, my last squadron, we had just got our first bird with the probe and everything, and it was fresh off the line. I think it had like 20 something hours on it.
Wow.
And people used to joke about like new plane smell, and Hawkeyes are still in existence. They're relatively old, and the E2Ds are new, but by the time I got to them, they'd been flown for a little while. I flew that plane, and it was like it was unbelievable. I mean, no paint scratched off of any control surface on the inside. I mean, it was pristine, and it literally had a new smell to it that was fantastic. And it hadn't had time to prang itself into the aircraft carrier hundreds of times, so it flew straight as an arrow, which is very rare for a Hawkeye. And it was nice. It was very smooth. But yeah, that's the new hotness, if you will, is the probe up front. So it'll be interesting to see how they end up deploying that tactically. But the plan is to make it more of a mission extension tool rather than, hey, we just bolted 7 times. We need to go hit the tanker overhead. It's more for
I'm
just
thinking you could
longevity.
bring a couple barrels of engine oil with you. Just launch right off in Norfolk and
just
stay over
slow crank them out.
No, just stay over the boat for the whole cruise. You don't even need to land no more.
Yeah, no, it's I mean, no seat is comfortable, but oh god, if I had to sit in that thing any longer than we already done, we would do double pumps all the time at the carrier. You go out for a double cycle because the E2D doesn't have quite the gas as the E2C does, at least the legs. You're out for a double cycle, come back, hop pump, get gas, go back out, another double cycle. I mean, you're in the plane for 9.5 hours by the time you come back for the night trap with no magic, especially the stuff that they have now to help land, the electronic aircraft. Ours is still just stick and throttle. And, I mean, your eyes are like bleeding out of your head and you're just trying to get everybody aboard at the end of the night. So it certainly builds character over time, but it's a hell of a plane.
A hard airplane to land. It's probably one of the more difficult airplanes to bring aboard.
9-hour missions. I hope you're getting paid overtime on that.
Yeah. It's we get the tax-free stuff for the North Arabian Sea, so that adds up over 10 months. So I'm doing all right.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
So back to that Japan time. What would you guys say was the most unique? Obviously, having, like we were talking about, having the whole air wing there at one place was one thing, but you're also in Japan. I lived in Japan for a couple years too, but I was on fleet staff, so I wasn't flying then. Well, I wasn't flying very much then. So what was it like being with the air wing, living in Japan?
Yeah, I think Sledge nailed it right on the head. The coolest part about it is having been in 3 different air wings now is that literally the hangars are all attached. CAG staff, we worked out of VFA 102's hangar, and across the street was VAW 125, and they're right next to the VAQ guys, followed by the Maces, the Dam Busters, 115. Everybody was right there. The COD guys and all the Helo guys were just across the runway. So, I mean, the O Club, when everybody would go, was fantastic. And some of the stories I'd heard about that O Club were amazing. I think I was born too late personally, but from what it used to be. But the cool part, especially, is as CAG paddles out there, there was one text message to the paddle shack, and every squadron LSO would show up and bring all their people. So the camaraderie, I guess, was fantastic out there, and it just made for a super good time. And by the time you get out to the aircraft carrier, everybody knows each other. Everybody's super tight, and so there's I wouldn't say a cowboy mentality to the way we kind of do things out there, but in some cases it feels that way just because you're out there kind of alone and unafraid and ready to go. And, it just, it made for an incredible time out there, and I absolutely loved it. We're doing FCLP dates out of Iwo Jima, which was insane.
Yeah.
And so it's just, it's an experience that is just, you can't find that anywhere else. Even in the Navy, the whole FDNF CAG 5 atmosphere is something unto itself that just made for a fantastic time. I loved it.
And you're so proficient the whole time too. I remember a couple of times where, between at sea periods, anyone who was a super JO or senior didn't even bother to bounce. I just had my last trap 2 months ago. Is this going to be a big deal? I've got 675 traps. Do I really need to go bounce at EWO?
Yeah. That's literally what it was. It's and they would time that import period so that nobody went out of currency. And so everybody would get recurrent the last two nights before you pulled in the spring were always to re-up everybody so that the numbers worked out. So 21 days later, we're back at sea and everybody was still current. And the only time that would get affected was when the boat went into in-serve, and now you have to be in port for a month. So everybody drops out by like a couple days, and then we would do a quick Iwo Jima reset and then back up to the ship. But Iwo was a thing. What an island. The history of that place is super intense, and then you're out there just doing God's work on the landing pattern. It's an experience that I'll never forget. That the waving, I love flying, but I told Lorenzo when we talked before, the waving aspect was the best thing I've ever done in my life. I absolutely loved it, and to do it out in Track 5 was as good as it gets.
So you guys would fly a bird down to Iwo, park it, and wave from there?
So the way that we would do it, we would jet down there a third of the year at a time. So we would send down the Hawkeye squadron and the COD det because the island wasn't big enough to handle the whole area. So we'd do the Hawkeyes and the CODs. They'd come down. They'd bounce first. And then we'd bring down 2 waves of jet squadrons. And over the course of – we would always plan for 10 to 12 days, and then the boat would break or weather would hit. And I think the longest stretch I ever did there consecutive was 24. But I've got almost 40 days on that island. And it's, obviously normal FCLPs, you don't have to have a CAG paddles involved. It's run by the squadron. The difference is in Iwo, there's a waiver that has to get re-upped every other year. So it's a 2-year waiver on 3710, which is, flying without a divert, because you literally do not have a divert. Iwo's about 700 something miles from land. And so the caveat to satisfy that waiver is you will always have a CAG paddles on station at the LSO shack in case weather rolls in. Now they've got a PAR system, but none of the American controllers are qualified on it. So it's a Japanese PAR, which will get you close, but it's dark. It's the closest I've ever seen anywhere replicate the actual aircraft carrier environment at night. That island gets super dark. There's nothing to light it up. Nobody's there. So that's why we were always down there, and it was kind of our show to run. CAG fall. It kind of creeps you out because it's. I was just going to say the NUC is the only other thing that flying out of Point McGill over to San Clemente, but we would only go there daytime when I was there out in Point McGill. But the weather would roll in every now and then, and it was a no kidding talk down. Ordinarily we're just kind of hanging out at the shack with the guys, letting them run their own program. But when the weather would really come in, which it happened every now and then, it was taxi lights on. And it would get a little dicey, and there's only the one runway. So if somebody fouls it, they had a resting gear on the taxiways. That every now and then the Japanese wanted to test those systems, so we would trap a guy on the taxiway just to make sure that everything was up and running, which is super weird. But it was an experience unlike anything else that I've had in the Navy.
So I can't help it, but I gotta ask: Did you explore the island and see any of the? I mean, there's much to all the caves, and there's stuff laying around all over the place still, right?
Most of the caves
Oh, really?
Yeah. So there absolutely is. The first time I went out there was when I very first got picked up for the CAG 5 paddles job, and it was the boat was an in-serve, so we were doing a quick Iwo reset, and that was basically the first waving that I did out there. And so the 2 guys senior to me, Duplo and Trey, are awesome guys, and CAG 5 always carries 3 CAG paddles, whereas every other air wing is 2. Just because of the amount of deployment and the turnover rate and everything. So it was great. It was the 3 of us. We had a blast. And these guys are all about exploring the island, into the caves and all that stuff. And I've just never that was never my thing. But I was like, I'm new here. I got to toughen up. I'm in. Let's go. my God, we would find these caves. They would find these caves because we would get our own van to travel around the island because we were there the entire time. And so we would use it to go, find new caves, all this stuff, and explore. And there is ordnance, like just stuff just laying around all over the place. And we get into these caves, and most of like the steps to get down into them are kind of worn out. So you're like almost tiptoeing down these essentially just steep hills. And we'd have a headlight. We brought headlamps and everything. And then you get down there, and my God, there's old rusted out racks, there's helmets, there's boots, there's medicine bottles, there's guns lined up on the side of the wall, and it blew my mind because I was like, it's not, nobody's coming out to preserve that. It's just literally still there, and it is super heavy. I mean, when you think of the loss of life, Marines, Japanese, just how that all went down. It really takes you. When we would make a tradition every time we went down there of going and watching a sunrise from Invasion Beach with our feet just kind of hanging over the brim of that beach, and just trying to picture, it's the south side of the island, and just trying to picture the fleet as they were lined up out there, just sending wave after wave in. I mean, it is super heavy. And then, the day kicks off and the smell of jet fuel, and you hear the motor start to turn. I was like, hey, we're back to work. So in a way, it almost felt like you're kind of honoring, what had happened there. That place is unreal. Top of Suribachi. I've been up there multiple times now. It's just it's a very heavy experience that you don't get to have every day.
I know every time.
Really lucky because they don't allow people to go out there, right?
No, they absolutely do not.
It's not a tourist position at all. I know we only went past it a couple times as I was going south out of Yokosuka, but every time we did, we always rendered honors. I mean, I can't imagine being on the island itself. So yeah,
it was like I said, it was super heavy, and just like Leekster was saying, it's certainly not a tourist destination. The Japanese have a very small contingent there to run the airfield, and then they have essentially this big excavation crew because they're literally still uncovering caves looking for their dead soldiers that were there. And so I think the Marine Corps twice a year will bring like a C-130 or a C-40 down so that the Marines can go see it, and they'll run Suribachi and everything because that's obviously a huge part of their culture and their history. Yeah. But I was so naive when I first went out there. Obviously, I knew relatively the history of the island. But I said to the guys, I was like, "Hey, we staying at like an NGIS. Is there an O Club? Do I need a collared shirt?" And they just looked at me and like, "Bro, you have no idea what this place is like." And I felt like an idiot when I got there. It's like 2 strips of barracks and a galley and a hangar. That's it. And
cool.
It was unreal. And usually when we would go down to Invasion Beach, we'd bring a bottle of something and just kind of drink it watching the sun come up. It just was like a toast to the guys. So I have several bottles that were consumed on that beach filled with the black sand, capped off. You never want to open it again, but it was just kind of a thank you to everybody that went out there. Oh my goodness. Like you talk about greatest generation, you feel it very specifically.
You're making them grow up all over again. Sledge, he just keeps smiling as you're talking, and he knows.
Yeah, it's like I stole some sand too and gave it to a Marine buddy.
Yeah. It's all part of it. And it's all still happening. I think there in particular, the traditions are just so steeped in everybody that's gone through. Because it's, for me, I went out there single. A lot of guys are geobats. That becomes your family. Not only on the boat, like we're all used to, but I mean, even when you're just on land in Japan. That's who you're close to, and it's just you build a bond and a camaraderie out there in CAG 5 that and 7 and 9 were great. I love guys on both of those air wings, but
they're different.
Goodness, exactly. So it was quite an experience.
Yeah, Chimpo, you mentioned shooting a text to guys and they're right there. You come together and you shoot a text them and they're coming together. I'm assuming, Sledge, you had the same situation. Just shoot them a text back there in the night. No texting. How did you guys get together? I'm thinking back in the day here. I mean, no, you guys used to probably still had a significant amount of camaraderie, I would guess, even without that electronic capability.
We had this thing called email.
Oh yeah.
Email
So no leaves and blankets.
Had landlines.
Oh yeah, call phone. What phones for using for phones?
You could actually speak to someone on
actual bells that rang in a plastic device. That's great. Hey, I want to bring in Steve Anstey here, and it's directly related to Chimpo. It's something really cool. It's an honor to actually even speak about this. And Steve's father is Wayne Anstey, and he's a Grumman line employee. And and worked at Grumman Bethpage for many years, and we'll get into that shortly. But I want to welcome Steve to the show, and between him and Chimpo, we have a great story to share. And Steve, I want to welcome you, and thank you for joining us tonight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Also want to mention you're a U.S. Air Force plane captain, F-16. So
yeah, crew chief.
Very
we
cool.
go by.
Crew chief, yes.
Yeah.
All right, we'll let him slide on that. Yeah, tell us a story about Dad working at Grumman, what he did, years, generations.
I mean, basically, my grandfather actually worked on the E-2 also, and that's how he met my mom. So my mom's whole life basically has been because of Grumman and because of the E-2. So then my dad worked for Grumman for 35 years. Can't remember if it was the first 4 or 5 years. He worked on the EA-6B for a while. He had a big part in the antenna on the tail, all that kind of stuff. That was when he first got there. Then he got switched over to the E-2 program. And basically the entire time, obviously we all know what happened in '92. So it was either go to Florida or they promoted him. Well, they promoted him so my sister and I can stay in school here, and because Grumman was always family-oriented the entire time. So he became, group manager for basically specs, mechanical engineering, all that. He was a mechanical, electrical, structural engineer, all that kind of stuff. Like he did everything. I met tons of guys that were from the F-14 program too. But he retired in 2009, which is a year after I got out of the Air Force, actually. And his first thing was, like, I want to see the E-2D fly before I retire. So that's what he did. Once the first flight, he retired. But he had, the amount of stuff he told me before he passed was the 8-blade props. He fought with the Navy guys, like, oh, no, we don't need this. He's like, no, you need this kind of stuff. And he solved basically, like, they were having stress cracks in the props. He solved that. He had a big to do with the gold windows on top, which Chimpo and I have talked about.
That's why Chimpo has kids. Well,
one day he will.
Yeah, I did none that I know of, but I assume that they'll be good when they come.
So yeah, he had big part in that. I mean, there wasn't much air of that airplane that he didn't have a big part of because he was on it for so long.
Awesome.
And it goes further back. I mean, he got his job at Grumman because during Vietnam, he worked on the B-52 and the fire control systems and the 50 cals that used to stick out the back of them. Which now it's all just countermeasures and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no guns sticking out the back of B-52 anymore.
No, not anymore.
Black box guns.
There's probably a couple of ones he used to work on still flying, believe it or not, because just as he was getting out, I think they had H's then. I think they're still flying now. But the guy who hired him at Grumman is actually the guy who designed the fire control system on the B-52. So they're like, oh, you can do this, you can fix this. Okay, you got the job, and that's then here we are.
Wow. So what year did you start with Grumman?
He retired in '09, so I guess subtract 35 years from that. I can't really remember. I'm only 35 myself, so.
Wow, yeah.
His Air Force was 64 to 68, and at least 4 years after that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a long time.
Yeah. 35 years.
Yeah, like I said, my grandfather, he worked on the earlier versions of the E-2 as well, when they had that weird wing-shaped radome on top, big bulky thing. But,
was that the E-2 also?
That's the non-rotating one.
Yeah.
Oh.
The Willie Fudd,
tracker.
I think they used to call that thing. Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
I remember seeing was that the E1 that also had one?
I believe so.
Yeah.
We have actually. I gotta find it somewhere in my mom's house, but we have some actual pictures of flying over Long Island, and I got some stuff. I actually sent some memorabilia stuff that my dad had, like 3 things of. I sent it down to Chimpo.
Yeah.
So it's stuff that you never be able to find.
Mm-hmm.
But as far as me, I was an F-16 guy, and, but I was always an F-14 fan. But when I was in probably kindergarten or first grade, I wanted to fly F-14s. My dad's like, by the time you're ready to fly them, they're gonna be out of service. He was right.
Sadly,
he was definitely right, because I technically wouldn't have graduated college at least until 2008. So obviously we
there we were on.
So and I was not flying F-18s. I don't like those things at all. I think they're big piles of crap.
we try to be congenial around here, but yeah, I mean, I've flown them both. Yeah.
I like the Super Hornet. The Super Hornets are nice.
The Super Hornets are a good piece of gear, especially as they continue to update it.
This guy's cursing left and right on the show.
What's that?
This guy's cursing left and right on the show.
I know. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've said this 100 times. If I've said it once, I've said it 100 times. If they had continued to update the Tomcat like they continue to update the Hornet, I would much rather be flying a Tomcat. But I didn't have that option, so I'll take the Super Hornet I got.
I have a friend that used to work 18s, and I tell him, all it is an F-17 that lost to the F-16, right?
Right.
The YF.
So he just tells me to shut up.
There we go. Shut up. So how did you guys get connected? I'm pointing at you because you're next to each other on my screen here. But how did you guys get connected?
So basically through Instagram, believe it or not. I follow a bunch of people he follows, and someone, I think it was Combat Learjet, if you follow on Instagram, shared one of his videos. I'm like, oh, it's an E2 guy. Awesome. I'm going to follow him. And I followed him, and then he went dark for a while. That's when he was on his 11-month deployment, and he popped back up.
Yeah.
Last year. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to message him. I mean, it was like almost a year from when my dad passed, but I was like, you know what? Like this would be a good idea. And I sent him a message and kind of shot in the dark. I wasn't expecting a yes. I was kind of expecting a no, but I got way more than a yes.
What was that message?
I mean, it was long. I don't even remember. I have to look back on it. But basically, like, hey, listen, my dad was, not only was an Air Force vet, but he worked in the E2 program for, 35 years. And, I wouldn't mind if, it would be awesome if you could fly a flag in his honor for him, because when he retired from Grumman, he really didn't get a send-off like everybody else got. That was one of his things that, he always, was disgruntled about, because he always set up stuff for, all the other guys that were retiring, but there was no one left for him, when he got sent off. So, basically this was what I wish I could have done it while he was alive, but unfortunately it wasn't. But I was able to surprise my mom because, Chimpo actually surprised me, and the day of, or the day before, was like, hey, how far were you away from, this airport? And I'm like, well, the landing pattern goes right over my shop. So I'm like,
it's pretty close, yeah.
Yeah, I was like, 2 seconds. At first, I thought it was actually the one further out east. Because I was sitting eating lunch. I'm like, wait a second, idiot! Like, no, it's not. It's the one that I literally hear airplanes flying in. The Blue Angels land there. So it's like 2 seconds. So I thought the great thing is to have my mom. I didn't tell her why we were there. So like, hey, come to the shop tomorrow around noon or something like that. And she's like, why? I'm like, just come. Then we drove over to the airport, and she's like, what are we here for? I'm like, you'll see. Don't worry, you'll see. And the first when we were able to see it, I pointed out to my mom, and it was like, you see that? She goes, yeah, it's an E2. I'm like,
with the throttles with the stops.
Yeah. I'm like, it's here for us. She's like, no, it's not. I'm like, no, it is. And then I kind of told her the whole story, and she was holding back tears.
Mm.
So it was definitely something that she really enjoyed, and I actually had friends that saw it too, and they're like, hey, did you see this? I'm like, yeah, I saw it. Like, it was here for me. They're like, no, it wasn't. And then John sent me a nice letter and a text message as well. He's like, send this to them, tell them, yeah, it was for you.
Right. So where are you actually? What field is this?
It's Farmingdale, called Republic.
Yeah, Republic.
Oh, yeah, Republic.
Republic Aviation Company.
Yeah, gotcha.
That Thunderbolt or that Warthog.
Yep.
Nice.
Another one of my favorite airplanes.
Oh yeah.
Chimpo, did you have any problem getting people to come up with you?
Oh no, it was it was weird. Like I said, we just got back from that very long deployment. COVID was hitting and everything, so it was honestly, we were actually making a push just to make sure that we flew all the hours that we had gotten, and I think part of it was to show Congress, whoever, like, hey, look, like, we're still flying all the hours, like we're making, putting your money to use and whatever. So we were gonna have a flight essentially scheduled for proficiency, whatever, anyways. But Steve reached out one day, and I've always been a big proponent of, kind of the Hawkeye. It's, always known as the fat kid and, big and ugly and slow. But I love the thing. It's, it grew on me immediately. I wanted to fly F-14 since the day I was born, at least since I saw Top Gun. It came out like a year after I was born. And I still remember the day I was at Annapolis, the day that the news came out that they retired the last one. I was like, oh, there goes that. But I knew it was coming. So anyways, I ended up in the Hawkeye, and everybody always said, like, hey, it's all going to work out for the best. You're going to love what you end up flying. And that was super true with me. And I just got to become a huge fan of this plane. So I'd posted a lot of stuff on Instagram, whatever, just kind of showing the plane. And, one day I get this message, just kind of out of the blue. And it was Steve, and he was like, hey, I've been following you for a while, whatever. And then he kind of explained the background of him being in the Air Force with the F-16, his father, who worked on north of Grumman and everything. And I was like, holy smokes, like, this is awesome. And he says, would you be willing to fly a flag in my dad's honor? And that's, as a naval aviator, that's like one of the pinnacles. Like, that's one of the things, not morbid, but a missing man formation or flying a flag, like, you do some heavy stuff for somebody, like, that's like the best thing you can do. And as a Hawkeye pilot, I spend my whole time just trying to get everybody back aboard the ship at night alive. And so you kind of take to this stuff, and I think it builds a part of who you are and whatnot. So I got the request for this, and I was like, holy smokes, like, absolutely, I'll do this. And I was actually excited that he had reached out, because it was just kind of a weird year last year for everybody. And I was like, oh man, like, if I can use this plane and bring some goodness to somebody else, like, that's exactly what I'm going to do. And
Awesome, man.
so then the next day, I remember I was thinking about it, because I was like, hey, here's my address, like, mail it out and everything. And I was like, oh, wait a second, like, what are the odds that, this guy, I say this guy because I didn't even know him at the time, but I was like, what are the odds that he's, somewhere within the service radius of the Hawkeye? So I messaged him, and I'm out of Norfolk, Virginia, is where we're stationed. I was like, hey man, just out of curiosity, like, where do you live? And I was like, not to be weird, but he's like, oh, I'm up in Long Island, and I was like, oh, hell yeah.
Yeah, that's easy.
Because I grew up in Massachusetts, so I'm well aware that plane will make it to Martha's Vineyard or Nantucket and back in one bag of gas. So I was like, okay, so Long Island is easy. And I got one of my best friends lives on Long Beach, Long Island, so I was familiar with the area. So I was like, hey, like, what airports are near you? And he was like, Republic is like, I think it was like the departure end of one of the runways. And I was like, all right, perfect. I was like, I'm going to get back to you. So then I just drew up the flight plan, made sure it would work, make sure that we had the approach plates and the DOD pub so that everything was totally legal and whatnot. And then I talked to ops and my skipper, and I was like, hey, we're just going to run a proficiency flight up the East Coast, whatever. We had a relatively new pilot, and as much as I wanted to be in the left seat and actually drive it, I had one of our brand new guys who I was supposed to fly with. And I was like, you know what, like, I'll take co-pilot on this as the aircraft commander and just kind of this experience for him as well, because it'd be a great thing for a new guy to actually get to do. So I took the right seat on that one, and I told him, I was like, hey, but here's what we're going to go do. Here's the flight plan. Like, I did all the flight planning for him. And in the back, we were getting some hours. They were turning on the radar, just looking out. There's a bunch of warning areas up and down the East Coast, obviously, that they can play with.
Yeah.
And so I told him, I was like, hey, look, if you want to go to the airport, I will fly this flag, obviously. But if you want, I'll bring the plane to Long Island, come in for the break, couple touch and goes, bring it back, and that way you'll actually, like, see the flight. And I think immediately Steve and I both were just like, oh, this is badass. Like, this is awesome. I was super stoked about the whole idea. So we got it on the flight schedule, and the flag came down, brought it into work, all folded up, and I briefed the crew on it the day prior, actually. And I was like, hey, guys, just a heads up, this is what we're going to do. This is some pretty awesome stuff. Like, it's kind of a heritage thing for us. So this is the plan for tomorrow. And so we went in the next day, briefed it, had a slight maintenance issue. I was keeping Steve updated the whole time. Didn't want him to miss it or him just like, where is everybody? So had a slight maintenance delay, swap birds real quick, and then hopped in the plane. And right before we walked to the plane, I texted him, and I was like, it'll be about an hour and 35 minutes. And so that was the plan. And we took off and went in and came in. Like I said, the pilot, he was relatively new, but I was like, we can't come into the break slow. It's for whatever it's worth. Like,
gotta make it look good.
As fast as a Hawkeye will go, that's the speed we're looking for. We always joke you can't sweep them back in the Hawkeye, but
well, you can once.
So we came in and exactly, that would have a different feel on this podcast if
Right.
But, so we came in, brought the heater right overhead, and he did everything. I think we had like 3 or 4 touch and goes, and then flew back. And then I called Steve on the way home, and I didn't realize he was bringing his mom as a surprise. And he kind of explained it to me. And I'm super tight with my parents, and they've seen me fly a couple times. Had my dad out on a Tiger cruise before, and so he said like, hey, I brought my mom out. And I didn't tell her why until you guys were overhead. And she was real quiet about it for a while. And I was like, holy smokes! Like we just did some awesome stuff, and. So I sent the kneeboard card that I had. That was what I wrote the letter on, and the patch that I had on my right arm, the squadron patch, and one of the squadron coins. And then Steve put it in one of those dedication boxes with the flag at the top and everything underneath it. And that came out super cool. And the whole crew was on board with it. And we had a 5-plane crew that day, or five crew plane that day. And it was great. Everybody was just totally into it. And like I said, last year it was like July, like COVID was hot. And it was just a weird time in everybody's life, and that was a flight I'll absolutely never forget.
That's really cool. I'm assuming, Steve, you've got this proudly displayed someplace where your mom does, I guess, right?
Yeah, I gave it to my mom.
Cool deal.
She kept telling me, no, hold on to it. I'm like, no, because I got friends in the Air National Guard here. They flew one on a UH-60 for him, basically right after he passed. And I was like, no, I have that one. This one you should have.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got it. It's got the like you said, the patch in it. It's got a coin in it. Got the nice letter that he wrote, obviously the flag in it. So yeah, I have one for the UH-60, and my mom's got that one.
That's cool.
Yeah,
that's really
we
cool.
Got some nice pictures of it. Definitely something beautiful, and I'll share it absolutely. And Steve, on a different turn of your career here, there's just absolutely no way we're going to let you get out of here without talking about this big mouth Viper with my GE 129 engine from Tomcat 21. Talk to me about.
I believe it's actually my engine because it actually flew with my airframe.
Yeah, there you go.
All right, I'll bow.
Good point. That's a fair point.
I'm bowing. I'm bowing on this. I want you to make the crowd drool and tell them about the GE 129 engine and what it would have been like in Tomcat 21 and how that motor performed in service.
It kicks the crap out of the Pratt and. Well, I got a better name for the Pratt Whitneys, but I won't say it.
Thank you.
But. No, I only worked. That's only a block of F-16 I worked was a block 50s with the GE F-110-129. It's the only one I worked, other than tech school for like a month out in Luke. But I mean, from what the pilots tell me, that it's absolutely nothing comes close to it. Yeah, I've seen it ingest some stuff that it shouldn't have, and it came back no problem. We had one that back shop didn't cotter pin one of the actuators and actually ripped the augment section down. I was walking into work and like, well, that's gonna suck. So I could see it going down the runway on takeoff like that with it, shooting all the chaff flare and fireballs coming out the back of it.
Wow.
But the guy took off, was doing the racetrack around the base. Got a low lube light, decided to go. He's like, all right, we're going to end up dumping over. We had a bombing range because I was stationed in South Carolina at Shaw. And he's like, I'm going to go dump it in the bombing range. Instead, he dumped the wing tanks and landed the airplane.
Oops.
So, yeah, and that's it. So I actually, when it came back, I actually ended up the next day, I had to sit there and like guard it because I had nothing to do with that airplane in particular. So I'm sitting there looking at it, like, how the hell did this guy fly this thing back? And this guy is either this guy is a nutcase, which, I mean, if you got a fighter pilot, you probably are, which is cool. Because it's like me being a race car driver too. It's like just whatever it is, it is. But and the airplane itself is just came back. We swapped out a couple of the fairings and put a new motor in it, and it was off to flying again. Probably about a month later.
Wow. Good stuff.
The engine was, other than the back section of it, was fine. Even with the low lube light, they didn't. I think they changed out a couple of the bearings on the main shaft, but that was it.
Wow.
Amazing.
Wow. Well, Steve, we gotta cut. Just let Sledge go. Thanks for your time, Sledge.
Hey, no worries. Enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you, Sledge.
Beautifully done.
Very much appreciate it.
We didn't even mention that you're like a movie star, that you're in the
Tomcat Tales, which you better watch.
My goodness, we should have put that in the introduction. I feel terrible. We really should have put that out because that's worth watching if anybody's an F-14 fan. if you haven't seen Tomcat Tales, you're really missing out. Where can you see that now? I don't even know if it's.
I think Viz is waiting to release that when the Tomcat, the Top Gun 2 comes out.
Mavericks.
So
Oh, okay.
kind of sitting on that one for now. But
My Tomcat Tales DVD came from Hawaii. Give a shout out to Stephanie for that. She sent it over to us, and just stellar careers, stellar pilots. It's an amazing video. It really is something you want to watch, and yeah, absolutely, great job, Sledge.
And now when it finally comes out, Sledge, everyone's going to go, wow, you look so much younger on TV.
He's got the Bob. All right, he's got a little Bob Seger look.
I gotta go, guys.
I can see that.
All right, thanks, Sledge.
Take care anytime.
Have an awesome night, sir.
All right, you too.
So, Steve, how do you think it would have worked out to have that engine in the Tomcat?
I think it would have been great. Actually, one of the guys my dad worked with, he was a boomer, and
You mean like a ballistic missile sub guy?
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep, I think he was a captain actually, and he asked me, he's like, oh, which F-16? I told him, he's like, oh man, he's like, we put that motor in F-14 and it shook that motor to death. Like I quote him, sorry for but that's his quote, not my words. It's him.
We'll edit that out appropriately.
So, how tonight's episode should have gone is we would have had LEEKSTER flying the F-14 A and B with the Diamondbacks, and then we would have had SYPHIN flying the F-14D with 31, and then we had CHIMPO flying Tomcat 21, with I don't know, VF2.
Yeah.
Like, we got robbed on this one, guys. But absolutely awesome, you guys, and amazing story together between the two of yous, and I've personally grown to know the both of yous, and just both of yous are just great people, and never not surprised by people you meet, in and around surrounding naval aviation. Personalities, the camaraderie, it's all second to none, and just absolutely awesome. I want to thank the both of you.
The interesting thing about those engines is sometimes they take a massive amount of damage and keep putting out thrust. I think as long as you haven't fragged a fuel line or you have a what they call an uncontained failure, which means the turbine blades exit the casing of the engine and cause hydraulic damage, or which can lead to a fire as well, and then you end up losing the airplane. But I have seen more than one engine where you can see actually through the engine because of the pieces that had come off in the turbine blades, and they continued to operate enough at a obviously a greatly reduced amount of thrust to get the airplane back on the ground, which is pretty incredible. And unfortunately, those engines are a large part of the cost of the airplane, but it's always good to have the airframe back on the ground and not have to go through an ejection scenario where, especially over land, where you could hurt somebody on the ground or completely lose a perfectly good airframe just because the engine quit on you. So.
When you lose a fan blade like that, if you damage that, and either in commercial or military, I imagine commercial will be more emphasized because of the size of the engine. Is there a certain cavitation you feel within the airframe that says?
Yeah, you get compressor stall and huge vibrations, and it's pretty dramatic in the airplane itself. And one thing that most people don't know about the accident with the in the Hudson and all that, Sully, is that those engines probably weren't that damaged, but they were what's called FADEC, which is a digital fuel control system, and there was there's two sensors on the front and a sensor on the back of the engine, and it measures differential pressure. And I think the ones on the front got fouled, so the engine was under the impression that it wasn't getting any airflow into it, and it wouldn't let the throttle put any more fuel into the engine. But the reality is that probably those engines could have continued to run if they were running with an older style fuel control system, because they weren't catastrophically damaged, but they weren't able to put out anything above basically idle thrust. And they tried to reset them by shutting them off and restarting them, but they were stuck there. So fighter planes, at least in the 80s and 90s, with the F-16, A4s, and different planes that I've seen, they had manual fuel control. So you could switch from automatic to manual, and that would give you a throttle that was directly connected to fuel flow, and you could continue to operate the engine, but you didn't have any protection from over-temping or over-boosting, over-RPM the motor. But in an emergency, certainly you don't care about that. You just want to get some thrust out of the engine so that you can hopefully get back to a runway. But yeah, jet engines are surprisingly forgiving sometimes of failure.
Yeah, the one time we were taken off out of El Centro down in El Centro, and Jojo, my pilot, I was in the RAG at the time. Joe's like, we just sucked down a turkey vulture or something. It was some big. I saw the bird, but I don't know what it was. It was dead. That's all I know. We sucked it down and it totally shut down our right engine. But honestly, other than looking at the gauge and he was feeling it with the throttle, I didn't feel it. Like it just went, and suddenly we didn't have a red engine, but we were carrying 4,000 pounds of bombs, so we turned around and came home.
Well, that's the luxury of having two engines on an airplane, right? Which is, recently an F-35 went in the water, and when you have an airplane with single engine like an F-16 or an A4 or an F-35, you're assuming that risk at that point. Okay, well, if we lose the engine, that's it, But we in naval aviation, I know I appreciated having more than one engine.
Every time. Oh yeah. Hey, Chimpo, how do you guys do with one engine?
So I've learned over the years that they intentionally build those engines as they do for all the planes, but at least they're on carrier aviation, so they can handle single engine flight offs. And so my plane, one of the reasons that there's so much torque and so much horsepower into that plane, even though it's not necessarily long enough to handle it without the rudder system it's got, which is massive, is to handle a bolter or a single engine cat shot as soon as an engine dies on the catapult shot and still fly away. And I guess I was always not leery of it, but I was like, all right, well, it's going to be a ton of power because this plane weighs 1 million pounds and or 59,000, whatever you want to call it. But
right, 1 million.
It's you hope it works. And it was one of my first ever flights as an instructor pilot. We were going down the runway, Greyhawk 01. I still remember the kid I was flying with, and the first plane to go that day. And the runway at Norfolk is slightly curved, so you can't quite see the top of it as you're going down. And 9 a.m. launch, first flight of the day, and I see a flock of birds take off from the runway, and I was like, oh God, it was like July. They were all out there sunning themselves. We had just rotated. I mean, it was VRV go, and I was like, oh Christ. And I remember saying as I'm watching just birds go by the cockpit, something effective like, oh, don't do it. And I turned my head to the right, so I was in the right seat, and I see two birds explode on the far wingtip, just vanish. And I also felt the plane kind of shudder. And they weren't huge birds, and I thought to myself, like, that should not have been enough to shake this airplane. And what I didn't see was the bird that got sucked into the intake and started bogging it down. And it was a boldface at the time, that if you have a generator caution, the next thing you do is check engine RPM, because the generators are running with the RPM. And if the generator goes out, it's probably because the propeller is not spinning at the speed it's supposed to. So I remember all of this happens at once. And so I turn my head back to the left, and I get halfway through saying to the guy, there was two instructors in the back with one student, they're doing a super stand check. And I was starting to say, hey, did you guys feel that? I got through, hey, and I see master caution, like right there. I was like, oh boy, we're losing the right side. So I said to the student, I was like, all right, buddy, we're losing the right side. Power's all the way up. Grab the gear. You got it. Just shut down the right emergency T handle. Flaps and rudder were good. And the next part of that emergency procedure for single engine when you lose an engine is whether or not you need to turn on the fuel dump to try to lighten the load of the plane. And this was middle of July, about 9 in the morning. It's already 85 degrees out, full bag of gas. It was an E2C, so probably about 56,000 pounds. And I'm like starting to think about reaching for the fuel dump, but I just waited a second just to see what the plane was doing. some of the worst conditions you can have as far as weather, heat, humidity, air density. One motor pulled that plane into the air like it was nothing.
Wow.
And it was awesome. And we climbed up, no problem. I held on the fuel dump. I was like, all right, I'm going to hit it if we have problems. I took the controls from the kid, and I was like, all right, let me see this. And we're 30 feet off the deck when that engine started to shut down. I mean, we had just rotated. And from 30 feet altitude, rad altitude, one motor, the left motor, pulled us away like it was nothing. And we got up, adjusted over the bay to a max trap weight, came back, and one of the guys who was actually CAC paddles with out in Japan waved us back in for the short field arrestment. So I'd always liked that plane. I knew it was a tank. I mean, Northrop Grumman, the whole, if it's not leaking something, it's out of something. Like, I loved that. I was like, this is just the most blue collar aircraft. And but my goodness, when it pulled me off the ground from 30 feet up to 6,000 feet so we could dump gas like it was nothing, that's when those horsepower gauges had a whole new meaning to me, and I started to love the plane even more because I knew I could trust it. And nobody wants to necessarily find out that way, and I was never nervous about how the plane would handle. But to get a first-hand account of that plane's single-engine capabilities, fantastic. I mean, absolutely flawless.
Question for you guys.
And I waved a couple of them, too.
Yeah, question actually was that was one of the questions with waving for the 3 is you would know when you're dealing with single engine operations on the boat like that, is there anything announced on the 5MC? Is it treated any different than a regular case 1 recovery to say? Did they make the rest of the deck aware, get things out of the way to say?
So we did specifically the boss would announce it for the crash guys.
Okay.
So that they were ready just in case something went wrong. So they had the trucks all loaded up, ready to go. Not that they're not in a regular basis, but obviously a little bit of heads up is helpful. For the Hawkeye in particular, we are forbidden from taxiing single engine around the flight deck. So if you bring a Hawkeye back single engine, and it might be the same for the F-18, I don't necessarily remember anymore, but certainly for the Hawkeye, just because of the asymmetry from how far apart those engines are, you can do it on a runway where you've got room to move, but on a flight deck, they won't let you. So you're literally shutting down in the wires, and they have to have all the crash and salvage guys come running out, shock chain the plane, put the hook on a dolly in, and taxi you out of there in silence, which is weird. I've been towed out of the wires before for different emergencies, hydraulic stuff. But yeah, so there's always an announcement, hey, this bird's coming back single engine. Similar to the announcement if there's any kind of hung ordnance, that's more of get people out of the way, raise GVDs 1 and 2. But single engine, it's specifically to let the crash and salvage guys know.
That's part 2 of the reason why the Hummer lands last, right? Because it takes so long if you need to do that.
Well, and that was kind of
with this. Every emergency plane, if he's not on fire, you're going to have him land last, and they'll get the other airplanes on board. Okay. At least when I was waving, that's what we would do. And also, you'd have them usually would do a straight in, even if it's daytime. Give them an extra long downwind, and so you can get trimmed up and all that kind of stuff. So
I assume the tolerance in waving, you'll say for the aircraft profile coming aboard, is going to be a larger window than a normal.
Not really. I mean, you're not going to let a guy hit the back of the ship, and you want to wave them off earlier because they don't have the same wave off capability on a single engine. So your tolerance is actually kind of tighter. You really want to see that's why you look to maybe set a guy up with a straight in so that they're just dead nuts on instead of trying to fly a normal day pattern, and give him his best chance of flying a nice, comfortable pass that's right in the heart of the envelope. Especially for the go-around, because if you're going to wave someone off, you're going to have to wave them off a lot earlier because they're not going to be able to climb out as easily. Not necessarily in the E2, and that was one thing. I was lucky as an LSO. I got to cross-train and fly the E2, and the airplane's just absurdly overpowered. So, and it's very nice machine for landing on the boat.
Awesome.
Well, it has been really awesome to talk with you guys today. It's been pretty cool. I know we've lost our Tomcat guest, but we've had some pretty awesome other guests as well. So thank you guys for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having us. This has been awesome.
We obviously love doing this, and it's for love of I think even for our non-actual Navy guy in the conversation here, our producer, our Grumman F-14 Tomcat. all things Grumman guy, I would echo what he says. The love of naval aviation and the community that we feel from that is why we do this. So, thank you guys for continuing to be part of that. And Chimpo, obviously, you're still making the story written, so thank you.
Yeah.
I got to thank you guys for joining us tonight, and it's absolutely awesome to hear the story of Wayne Ansteys and his family, his son Stephen.
Yeah, that's super impressive. Well done, Chimbo.
Yep.
Appreciate that, guys. Thank you. I was, like I said, I was stoked to have the opportunity. It was something you don't get to do every day, obviously, and it was awesome. And Steve and I have been talking and friends ever since. So one of these days I get on Long Island, we're going to get deep into a couple of bottles, and it's going to be fantastic. But until then, it's going to be good. I'm excited.
Good deal.
For sure.
Well, again, I thank you all for joining us tonight, and have an awesome evening. And thank you again, everyone. Take care. We're out.
Cool. Thank you, guys. See you.
Feeling the shadow, feeling the shadow.